in the stall, like bouncing between the walls, like making too much noise, just messy, sloppy kissing, like just rough sex generally. And it was fucking perfect.
Hello, I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, the podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories that they created there, and the people that they used to know. This week, it is the crossover episode that none of you asked for, but despite that, I promise you are going to love. If you follow me on social media, and if you don't, why the hell not? My profile is Lost Spaces Pod on most every platform except for TikTok because I haven't really got the energy to try and figure that out. Then you will know that this week I was the guest on the podcast NotStalgia. And I always say it NotStalgia like I'm really emphasizing the fact that it's not nostalgia, it's NotStalgia. Sorry about that. Now, this is a really cool show where the hosts, Jess and Eric, discuss an original film and then discuss its remake and contrast and compare the plot changes, the direction, the colors sometimes, which always makes me feel stupid because it's really arty and clever and highbrow. But they were kind enough to let me bring the tone down on the episode that I featured on, which was all about Boys in the Band, that classic 1970s film about a party full of the most dreadful people and its 2020 remake. So do go and check that out. But why am I telling you all about this other podcast when you've not tuned in to listen to that podcast and you just want to hear about a lost queer space? Well, it is because I was lucky enough to be joined by Eric La Febre, who is the co-host of the NotStalgia podcast, and he came on to my show to tell me all about the lost San Franciscan punk bar Lucky 13. Along the way, I learn all about the fine art of cruising, sloppy snogging and nightclub toilets. And we have this really interesting conversation about the idea versus the reality of community. And we'll kind of fall into an existential hole and discuss what actually community means. Sorry, got a bit heavy. Let's get into it. When I see American porn that has men having sex underneath a toilet cubicle, I'm always like, holy shit, like that toilet cubicle like is so high off the ground, like that can't be real.
Yes.
But is that real?
It depends. Some public restrooms are. They still have a high stall.
It's so high.
It's pretty high. Some of them are. Some of them it's like that much off the
Okay.
ground. And some of them there's no entry point, so to speak. But yeah, it completely depends on the place. And so I think that like access and ability to possibly cruise is where a lot of cruising spots pop up and become kind of like hotspots for it.
So it's engineered by town planners, is that what you're saying?
I think that modern public architecture is homophobic.
And what's modern? Like what period?
I guess of the last 15 to 20 years of like redesigning public spaces, whether it's restrooms or whatever, restrooms more specifically because of the recognition of the possibility of cruising or public sex in this way, where it's like, well, we're going to mitigate that and close it off completely whenever something is redesigned. At least in my own personal viewing of sort of renovations in these public spaces, that's what I've been noticing. But again, my perception and perspective is so limited in scope where I've only like, it's like, oh, well, what I've seen, but it's like, it could be coincidental that some of the newer bathrooms, the ones that I've seen, have this, and now I'm creating this sort of like, well, all bathrooms are that way based on
Narrative
this
around
very
it.
small subset of like experience points.
It's just so rude when they get rid of the glory hole, isn't it?
It really is. I'm like, it's not hurting anybody. We're fine. It's great. It's a joy. It's a treat even.
Do you remember your first glory hole?
Well, it wasn't a glory hole per se, but it was a like understall moment
Okay.
that led to something else. And this kind of dips into the music aspect as well. I was, and this was wild. I was 17 on a North American tour with my band at the time. I think we were in like week 5 of a 9-week tour. We were in London, Ontario. We had gotten to the venue early, and I think we had like 8 hours to kill or something. So it was a national holiday, and I don't remember which. So the downtown area was pretty empty. There really wasn't a lot going on. It was kind of like a business district. But I remember being like, I'm going to go explore the city. And I ended up in a mall. I do not remember which, but I was at this mall. I was in the bathroom. Obviously, like, it's been a while. I am very horny in this space. And so I was in the bathroom and somebody cruised me in the stall next to me. It was just the two of us. They tapped their foot, the protocol of the tap, tap, reciprocated tap, and then maybe a shifting of the heel to show like interest, and then maybe a hand under, what have you. And that happened to me. And then the person got out and went to wash their hands. And then I locked eyes with them through the crack of the stall. And then they came back into the stall. And I was like, oh, so this is like happening. This is a very interested person. Okay. They ended up exiting the stall again. I exited and I followed them out of the bathroom. And this, it kind of still blows my mind that like I wasn't cognizant of cruising as an idea. I thought this was like a individual standalone, wow, what a story thing happening to me that I don't know anybody who's ever done this. This is so exciting. So I followed him out of the bathroom, through the mall, out of the mall, into the parking garage. And I followed him up the stairs of the parking garage. And we hooked up in the stairwell at the top of the parking garage. And I remember it so clearly. And it was so exciting because it was like, I'm not even from here. I'm like, who am I? Like, am I this person? This is amazing. And then afterwards he was like, hey, yeah, thanks. And just like left. And I was like, whoa, that's amazing. And I remember like standing on this at the top, leaning over the parking garage and like looking out into the sort of London skyline on this gorgeous day in Ontario, and just thinking like, wow, I like it. It almost seemed like one of those pivotal narrative moments where like I've changed, and it's like that coming of age recognition of change where like I'm not the same anymore. And I remember going back to the venue and feeling almost like a different person. Like things had changed, and I'm suddenly like this full-fledged queer adult. I mean, granted, I was 17, which is wild, but going back into this space being like, I have changed. Everything about me is different, and I'm suddenly this empowered, autonomous, powerful being of
strength
and sexual enlightenment.
That must have been some blowjob.
It was because I think it was the second time technically I'd ever been with a man in any capacity. And the fact that it was a stranger too, I was like, whoa.
Okay, I have follow-up questions.
Perfect.
So this, like, the time that it took to walk from the bathroom to the top of the stairs, how long was that?
Probably 10 minutes.
And so you
And
didn't
it was
just...
the most exciting...
You didn't just freak out and give up halfway through?
No.
Did you think about that?
Kind of. I thought about it in the moment briefly, the danger of it, of like, who even is this? Where are we going? I don't know. But to me, I was at this very sort of, I think it had also had to do with just being on tour. I had just graduated high school, by the way. We left 2 weeks after my high school graduation to go on this crazy trip. I'm missing all of my friends, my family. I've never been this far away from home for this long of a time before. So there was a bit of a fantastic delusion of like nothing really matters because like what even is this city? Who even am I in this city? Nobody I know is here for the most part. I'm like severely depressed, also super elated. Like it's this weird sort of emotional mix of so many different experiences and feelings to where it kind of numbed me a little bit of like new city every day. I was just kind of like, well, I'm just here. And so the level of danger felt minimized because of that numbness to the experience. And so I did recognize that like this could be dangerous, but I still went, and it was the most exciting like 10 minutes.
Yeah. I don't know if it's even the danger
Yeah.
that I'm focusing on. It's the whole like opportunity within those 10 minutes to overthink things and to be like, well, maybe he wasn't coming on to me. Maybe I'm just following him like an idiot and he's going to turn around and tell me to fuck off. Like all of those thoughts.
To me, I would have felt the same way, but there was a very clear like hand under stall situation to give me the signal that like he was interested. And then when we exited, there were several times he would lock eyes in the very traditional like look back cruising moment where it was
like, you're still there. I've got you. Let's make sure.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
he's locking eyes. I'm still following. Cool. You're still following me. He turned a corner. Look, I'm still there. An acknowledgement of like, oh, great. You're still interested. Let's go. Yeah.
And then the next follow-up question. The thing about... What am I trying to say? The thing about like being socialized as a heterosexual when you're a child and being told over and over like, you are going to meet the one, you are going to save yourself for the one, you are going to like have this special flower forever. And then transitioning from that into the world of like casual sex or to cruising or to other things, it's a bit of a mind fuck. Like, I know that for me, like when I started doing casual sex, I was like, oh, I guess we're married now. Like, you know, I guess we're going to start dating. I guess this is it. So like that thing being your second sexual experience, when he walked away, was it a bit like, oh?
I mean, ish. So that was my second queer sexual experience.
Oh, you'd already slutted it up. Okay.
I'd had typical heterosexual sex.
You'd already given away your flower.
Oh yeah. That notion of like saving yourself, I kind of rid myself of that very early in a way that I recognized the goodness of sex and the power it held for everybody involved, especially in like a very consensual, loving, nurturing experience. And so with that in mind, I'm like, why would I ever not do this? Like that seems so, it seems like such a control tactic. And I, as like a young punk, I was like, I'm not going to be fucking controlled. You cannot stop me from finding this joy, from fulfilling these wonderful things with myself and people who also want to experience these things. And I am not going to be stopped by you. So there was that level of thinking from like 13, 14, 15, 16, like my teen years. It was very that where like I wasn't really drinking, I wasn't really doing drugs, but sex, I was like, oh, that's amazing and good, and I want this. But this particular situation, this particular instance of sex was kind of enlightening just in the casualness of it. Before this, I'd never really had an encounter that was as casual as, or not even necessarily transactional. It was just very like, yes, you want this, I want this. I don't know your name. Fine. You're hot. You think I'm hot. This is cool. Boom, boom, boom. 5 minutes later or whatever.
Is that all it took?
Have a great day.
Minutes?
I mean, I was
17.
And I was like, what, five weeks into a tour, like where I'm stuck in a van with all of my friends. Like it was a lot. And I mean, that's also probably part of it too, the euphoria of that release and like the whole experience of it. And then standing there and like taking in everything that is there in that sort of like post-cum brain of like, oh, like everything is lovely. All of those endorphins, you know that just, ooh, like everything changes.
The risk with post-cum brain is that it can go one of two ways. It can go in that direction where it's like, wow, I have this brand new perspective on the world. Or it can go in the direction of, who the fuck was that? What the hell is wrong with me? Why did I do that? I am disgusting.
And see, that is actually something that I've struggled with for most of my years. At least in my 20s, shame as it stands with sex, like attaching shame to sex or feeling shame around sex, whether that is in any capacity, post sex being like, why did I do that? Or, oh, I'm not good enough to have sex with this person, or I'm not lovable enough to be desirable. I'm not, what have you. Like every iteration of shame in that bracket of sexual experiences, I've really spent a lot of time working on that. And I've gotten to such a lovely place. I think what is interesting to me is that in this moment, in hindsight, not even a wince of shame came over me. And I don't know why, because especially at that age, I feel like that would have been huge. I would have been like, why? Oh my gosh, like I'm not this person. Me doing this? Absolutely not. But in that moment, it was just like, yeah, that was great, and I'm feeling lovely by it.
And there is that saying, "When in Canada."
When in Canada, exactly. It's true to form. Those Canadian boys really are very, very welcoming.
And so you've had this dalliance. You've then gone back to the venue. Did you tell anyone, or did you kind of just keep that to yourself and have a little bit of a smugness?
It was very much a secret. There was a slight smugness just in like this uptick in optimism, I'd say, where it went from me being a little bit sultry, a little down in the dumps, to just like, yeah, show, perfect. Let me set, like, you know what I mean?
I've written 3 new songs.
Exactly. I was like, oh, I'll set up merch. Yeah, no, you guys go have a drink. I'll be in charge of merch tonight. How does that sound? You know what I mean? The performative optimism of it. So it was pretty easy going when I got back to the venue, and I did keep it a secret because at that time too, I wasn't out to my band. Nobody in the band knew that I was gay, even though arguably the band that I was in at that time that we were touring with was a pretty like queer subversive. Our lead singer, he also wasn't out, and he also passed away several years ago, so we never really discussed his queerness to any degree. But every night in drag, full persona, wig, like just he went from Johnny to Jenny, and that was the whole thing, was like this queer subversion of a very toxically masculine music scene, and we were the band kind of showing up and destroying everything about it. Sometimes to our what is the word? Negative
detriment?
Thing. Negative action. Detriment. Thank you. Sometimes to our detriment, because there were times where like we would do this very overtly queer thing in these exceptionally straight spaces, and people would try to fight us on stage or after the show or whatever. They did not want it, and we said, fuck you, we're going to do it. And I mean, that was the whole deal. So, but I was still, even in that environment of like understanding the subverting of straightness, I was still like so terrified to come out, which seems so strange to me.
Well, yeah. Like looking back on it, do you know why that was?
I felt as though maybe because I was known as one thing, that it would change people's opinion of me. I'm not to say that like it would, but the fear of the possibility was the thing I think that charged the most doubt in myself.
You can't put the lid back on the bottle. That's not a phrase, but yeah.
But yes, exactly that. It's once it's out, it's out.
Oh, genie! It's the genie. I'm out. It's the genie out of the bottle.
The genie. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Yes, and I am a full Robin Williams. So I
see you more as Will Smith in the remake.
I am gonna go cry in my bed.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a throwaway joke. I didn't mean it.
No, it's okay. I've actually not seen the remake, so I can't realistically say that feels like a negative. But yeah, so that was the whole thing. I mean, I did come out to them, I think a couple years later, and it was very just like, oh yeah, cool. I'm like, oh, cool. And then subsequently, our lead singer similarly was like, I think, and I was like, let's talk about it. But it was never a full conversation. He was very, he would get into it a little bit, but then be like, actually, I don't know anymore. And you're like, okay. Like, if you want to discuss it further, if you want to talk about it more, we can. I'm always here, you know that. And then that conversation just never ended up happening, unfortunately.
And so you say at this time, like, you weren't aware of the concept of cruising.
No.
How did you come to understand what it was? And what is it?
So the concept of cruising to me is that sort of like the excitability of the possibility of sex, oftentimes in public spaces with strangers. To me, that first experience of cruising was so intuitive, I think is the right way to phrase it for myself, at least. It just felt like no words were exchanged, but I recognized like this person wants me. And that excitement is like, oh, okay, great. I'm going to follow these sort of nonverbal cues of whatever this engagement is, and we're going to see how it goes. And having such an exceptional first experience with that, it kind of sparked this kink in my brain to be something that is sort of like a lifelong fascination and desire for. So cruising itself, it could be anything from like you walk past somebody on the sidewalk and you lock eyes and there's an instant like spark. You walk past them. It's like the double take where you both turn. If they turn and you see each other looking back at, it's just like, oh, game on. Boom. You're excited. I'm excited. Whoa, what a joy. It could be anything from just like that by itself. It's like, I would be like, oh, I got cruise. Like, that's so fun. Or following through on something, whether it's like like literally finding a bush in the park to have sex in, fun. Or it could be like going back to their place or going back to your place, or even going on like a date or like hey, you're like hot and you seem cool. Do you want to go get a coffee or something? Like, cool. Yeah, I got cruised and then we went and had like a lovely little afternoon.
Have you actually done that?
Yes. That's actually how I met my first boyfriend.
But like,
we cruised each other on the train, and then we got off at the same stop and followed each other, and then he introduced himself, and I was like, do you want to go grab a coffee? He's like, yeah. And then, I mean, we eventually had sex that day, which was great, but it started off as like let's get to know each other a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of cruising. I love the idea of it is just so exciting to me because it is that sort of like chance meeting. And I tend to be a very adventurous and spontaneous person, especially if I have like, say I have a day where nothing's going on and the world is my oyster, so to speak. If one of these things happens, I'm like, this is my day, exactly how it was supposed to happen. Perfect. Like, now I know what's happening. I have no worries. Let's just see what happens today. Like, what a treat. What a privilege to be able to do that.
But I guess my thing is like, I need to gear up to having conversations with human beings. So if someone was just like, hey, let's have a chat, I'd be like, what? Huh? And then I'd just make a fool of myself.
I mean, arguably, I have made a fool of myself many times in these instances. The excitement of it gets me a little bit tongue-tied, and I get a little fumbly, but at the end of the day, I try to use that fumbliness and reframe it as charming.
Pass it off as charm. And oh, check me out. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh, I'm so silly. So I mean, oftentimes I feel like it works to my advantage.
And so do you have a sharpened ability to find hiding spots?
Kind of. I still am a little skeptical of a lot of like very public sex stuff, just by nature of it being, it's exciting, but it is very dangerous just because of the legalities of it. So for me, the excitement, at least nowadays, comes from the possibility of and the ignition of cruising, and not necessarily a sexual act in a public space.
So do you know what the legality is in the States? Like, the legality here is really weird. Like, you can't have sex in toilets and stuff. Like, that's illegal. There is no law against having sex in public, but there's laws against public indecency. So you can like have it in the park as long as no one sees you, and that's not illegal. But as soon as someone sees you, then it's illegal.
Yes, I think, I don't know exactly, but I do think that that's a very similar situation here, where it's the if somebody sees you, then it is a decency violation, and you could get caught on that.
But so is that where they're saying if two homosexuals fuck in the woods and no one sees them come?
That's actually where it comes from. Yeah.
Ah.
So in the queer literature,
Uh-huh.
the encyclopedic volume one
The book you
actually.
have to read in order to get your license to be a practicing homosexual.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was actually
yeah.
one of the things I studied really hard on was public cruising, that portion of the book,
Uh-huh.
and that's exactly where it comes from. Yeah. But it for me, the public stuff is a little bit tricky, obviously for those reasons. So if I say were to meet somebody and it would be like go back to somebody's place or what have you, I know that after that tour, I'd moved to San Francisco to go to school. I went to San Francisco State, and part of that experience of moving to a very gay city, a very queer city, as a newly out person, and having just sort of discovered this flame of kink and of cruising and of everything. It was like this gorgeous little secret that I had that like absolutely made my mind flutter with good feelings. I decided to like start not necessarily practicing, but just like kind of practicing it. And I would take the train, take Muni to Castro, get off at Castro, and I would just kind of like walk around and see what's up, as they say. And the stretch between 18th and Castro, if you walk down 18th to Dolores Park is also famously a big cruising spot.
Uh-huh.
On that walk, that was where you could get a lot of glances or a good like, hey, you, me, maybe. But the first actual place that I would start cruising was this small bookstore, a couple storefronts down from the Castro Theater. It's now, I think, Dog-Eared Page Books, but it was called something before that, and I don't know what the name of it was. But they had like a small porn section in the back, as queer bookstores often do. And it would be like a lot of guys who were just cruising the bookstore. And it was what a treat. Like I'd hooked up with a couple guys who were there. Eventually I wanted to explore other things, but that was one of my like main stops in the walk around the Castro. But this actually brings me to the space itself, the space in question. One of the fronts that I always wanted to visit was this bar called Lucky 13 between Church and Castro. It was always on my walk when I would go cruising or when I would just like enjoy the city and kind of being like the sad little queer punk with no friends in San Francisco. I would walk by it and it was this like little punk bar in kind of the hub of queerness in the city. And I always wondered, like, is this a gay bar? Because some people told me it was and some people told me it wasn't. But it felt like everything that I was kind of rolled into one. This like perfect punk bar. I'd see gay people go in and I'd be like, wow, I want to try this. I just want to go in and like meet people. This seems like the best place. And I mean, ultimately, like pick people up at this bar is an ideal.
Well, so
But
how long did it take you from finding out that this bar existed until you actually first went in?
2 to 3 years. So yeah,
How
I
come?
wanted this so bad, and I spent time just looking at it and being like, one day I'll go in there, and one day I'll be accepted into this group. I mean, granted, I created this big idea of what the community of Lucky 13 was and who these people were. I mean, it was just a dive bar. I know that there were regulars and there was community there, but to me as like a 18, 19-year-old, I was just creating this romanticized version of what this was because of my intersecting identities of both queerness and like subculture. This felt like my space. But yeah, it was about 2 to 3 years because I wasn't 21. And so the times that I tried to go in with a fake,
Of course.
I know, right?
Ah, okay.
I would try to go in with a fake ID and they would just be like, oh, no, this is fake. And be like, oh, okay. And I'd leave.
But so then let's just paint the picture a bit more about who you were at this time. So you'd come out by the time you went to San Francisco?
The first year I was there, I was out to my friends, but not my family. And so it was after that first year that I then came out to my family, and it was okay. I think it was pretty good, all things considered. I feel very lucky in that respect. I mean, now I think initially it was a little like what, but subsequently it's been nothing but joy from them. So
And so, like, your level of personal torment, if we were going on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is not very much, 10 is a lot, where would you be landing?
personal torment in what capacity? What do you
Just like
mean?
that kind of late teenage, early adulthood ability to beat yourself up and think that you're shit.
Oh, 10.
Oh, okay.
10. 10, 10, 10, 10,
And
10.
how much
Yeah.
was your queerness wrapped into that?
6,
Okay.
I think. In hindsight, 100% it is like a sort of internalized homophobic type situation. I think in the moment I trivialized that aspect of it and felt like, no, that's not what it is. I'm just depressed and I'm worthless and whatever. Come to find out later, I just have severe depression and anxiety.
Oh, just severe depression and anxiety.
Just severe depression. Yeah, exactly. Just severe depression. It's like no big deal. But I like being in this new city and like discovering this new version of myself and trying to find where like, you know that like that weird early 20s time is just so arduous and terrifying and just so structurally flimsy. Like everything changes all at once. It's just like such a wild time. And so that on top of dealing with undiagnosed depression and anxiety where I was an absolute mess and I feel like I really just like did not like myself. So those years were really rough. And I was also drinking a ton. I was so enthralled by alcohol. It was like such a nice reprieve from it. I'm currently 2 years sober. So I did stop drinking because it's not good for me. It's not good for my brain at all. I realized that fairly recently that I'm like, oh yeah, like you're like the more I find out about myself and how I exist, the more I can see these patterns and recognize that like, oh, that's why this is a problem for you. Like let's pull that back. Let's maybe not do that. Maybe you aren't somebody who this is good for. And I don't think I am, so I stopped.
And so then getting to the city, finding yourself like in like a rented flat or whatever, not being able to go to bars, but being able to cruise. Was that how you found other
Yeah.
queer people, or were there other ways in?
So kind of, yeah. I think at that time too, I was leaning towards, I've always had, and this is very fun for me, a fascination with and attraction towards daddies and like older men.
Wait, why is that fun?
Because I just love it. I'm like obsessed with the stuff.
Oh, okay.
I'm like,
Wait, obsessed with what? The concept.
the concept of like it's not even necessarily like actual fatherhood. That's not necessarily it, but the concept of like having lived and having confidence and like a gray beard and like like that nurturing aspect of like
Okay.
everything about it is so exciting and enthralling for me in a way that like I've never considered or wanted to like fetishize that kind of person, but it is something that I've noticed, especially in my early days, that I was exceptionally attracted to. It was just something that absolutely piqued my interest. So cruising was great for that because I would meet random fellas who were a little bit older, and it was gorgeous. But at that time, not being able to drink and trying to discover that sense of community, I would take a book or take something to a coffee shop. And some of the coffee shops around the Castro were open late, like Cafe Flore, or I think Pete's was even open a little bit later. And I would just go and sit in these spaces and try to engage. The Starbucks that was down at 18th and Castro also, it used to have a very particular design of it. Before they remodeled it, you'd walk in, and to the left, if you went up, there was a small riser with tables that looked directly at the line of people who were getting coffees. And then beneath that riser in front of it, more tables. So it was almost like you walk in and then everybody who's sitting is watching you. It was almost like an intentionally, which I'm assuming it was, queer design of like gazing, of cruising almost. It felt like it was designed that way. So of course, little 19-year-old me would absolutely go and find a little spot on the riser and just like do a little public performance of like, oh, I'm reading. Am I? What are you doing? You know what I mean? It was like, I would try to find my in wherever I could, even though I tended to be very very timid and very quiet. This was the one thing that I felt like I had confidence in to some degree. And it was fun for me. It was like a little game with a perfect little treat at the end.
And so would you start conversations with people? Sorry, this is like
No, yeah.
Like, you know how terrified I am of strangers. This is my approach to the questioning. Like, what, you actually like talk to them? What?
So to be fair, most of the time, yes, but sometimes it was like very few words were exchanged, which was always like a very hot aspect to it. But more often than not, it would be like somebody would sit down, or like it's very clear that we're recognizing some kind of interest, and then one of us would start a conversation and be like, "Oh, what are you reading, or what are you doing?" It's like, "Oh, I'm on my lunch break," or "I'm whatever." And then eventually somebody would be like, "Oh, well, you're very cute." It's like, "Oh, well, so are you." And it's like, "Oh, cool. What are you doing this afternoon?" And then it would be like, "Oh, nothing, just this." And I'd be like, "Oh, hey, do you want to come over, or do you want to like whatever?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, that sounds great, actually. Like, I'd love to." And then
Oh, it's so
lo and behold,
cringe. Oh, it's so cringe.
it's so cringe. Yeah,
Oh.
it's very exciting.
See, this is why I think the hanky code needs to come back. You can just then, like, just wave your hanky.
Yeah.
And then
So-
decide.
And then decide. I think that's the exciting part too, because the times where there wasn't really much conversation, it was just like pure sex. For me, the conversations is where I was able to like make friendships, because like we were able to talk, and like especially if like even if we didn't have sex, if it was just like we get cruising, then it's like we just get to talking. Suddenly we have a lot in common, and it's like, oh yeah, actually the time's kind of slipped away. I have to go, but like, could I get your number? Do you want to like hang out again? I really enjoyed your company. This is fantastic. Like, what are you doing later? We can hang out. And so I did make quite a few friends that way.
The other side of that coin is when you're like going to hook up with someone and then you have a conversation and suddenly you're like, oh my God, you're the biggest wanker in the world. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Yes.
And like, now do I just completely compromise my own morals and have sex with you anyway? Or do I just leave?
Okay, so to be fully fair, I've run into this several times, and one time I did go, and I was like, oh God, I hate this. It did not feel right. Like the vibes were absolutely off. We had very little chemistry. But there have been times where like we're walking home, or like we just chatted, and suddenly it's like, yeah, are you interested? And then I'm like, actually, no. And I've only been like very straightforward, like, actually no, I'm no longer interested, but I hope you have a really good day. But another time I did like fake a phone call, be like, oh fuck, something came up, I really have to go. I know.
Who was ringing you in your fantasy? Who was ringing you?
It was my it was my friend on campus at the time of school. Something came up where like
so plausible.
they couldn't get into their room, or like they're having a panic, a bit of a crisis, and they're like, I need you to come and talk. And I was like, hey, my friend's like really going through it. They just moved here and it's like really rough and I have to go. It is what it is.
Oh, so you haven't been like me and just gone like, oh, I hate you, but I'm gonna have sex with you anyway.
I have
Oh,
done
okay,
it
good,
one
good.
time where the vibes were just like absolutely rank. But we're here, and great, let's just do it.
You took me to the edge of
Yeah.
the cliff. Like, I'm gonna have to jump.
I know. And see, that's one of those things where I'm like, oh gosh. At any point I can say no, but I understand that it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's like you've got your hope up. Like your one hope. You've got your hopes up. Like you're like, you owe it to yourself to see it through.
Yeah. Where it's like, you know what, we're already here, we're already enjoying it to some degree. Like, why not just like, if anything, it'll be a fun story. Hooray.
And that is the whole thing. The frustrating, horrible, annoying, but also wonderful thing about sex is that sometimes you have amazing chemistry with people who you absolutely despise. And sometimes you have no chemistry with people who you love.
And isn't that such an unfortunate reality?
It sucks.
Some of the best sex I've ever had in my life have been with men who like the sex is just phenomenal, like an all night situation. And the next morning, we'll go and get like a coffee or something. And they are absolutely like atrocious to the person who's working at the coffee shop. And it's just like, oh my God, what? How? How is that you? Oh no, this is who you are? Fuck. I guess I never have to see you again. Damn it. Or I'll see you again and we just don't get coffee. Because the sex is great. It's so good. But the coffee situation, no. I cannot be around that. That's rough.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right. So Lucky 13, because I do believe that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yes.
So eventually you got to a point where you were old enough, which is 21 in the US, to go to Lucky 13. But, was that like the first place you went to as soon as you turned 21, or did it take a while?
Kind of, yeah. It was sort of, the day had finally come for that moment, and I jumped at it. I think it was like on my birthday or the day after. I went to Lucky 13, and it was great. It was gross. It was grimy. It was like a cool assortment of like punk people, queer people, and like it just felt great. It was also cheap beers, and there was this like really shitty popcorn machine in the back and some pinball machines, and it was kind of like all I had hoped it to be. It wasn't this big fanfare or anything wild, but the biggest thing for me, I remember when I walked in, they have these like really gorgeous illustrated like show posters, punk show posters on the wall in the back. And two of them were actually, my band's name was on these posters. Now, this band had been around for a while and I just joined them. So these were shows that like happened years before I had joined. But it just felt so, I mean, maybe that's just local music, but it felt serendipitous to walk into this space that I had kind of held at such a high standard and really romanticized, to then walk in and see like this thing that I identify so strongly with, my band's name, is in this gorgeous poster on the wall, not just once, but twice. Like it felt correct, if that makes sense. It felt serendipitous, I think, is the most accurate way to describe that, where any qualms or any fears that I had about this moment of being allowed in this space were immediately squashed. They were immediately just decimated by the recognition of like, yeah, I feel like I belong here. I feel like this is a space for me.
And you said before that you had imagined the community in there and thought about what it was like to belong. How did reality live up to the fantasy?
I think it was less fanfare than I had thought. Not to say that it's like, yay, he's finally here. Woo! Like that's not, you know what I mean? Like, because who am I? I'm just some kid. But I had kind of always hoped that like there would be a group of people in there who I'd immediately like latch on to, or a group who I'd see frequently, and we would like get to know each other. And that didn't really happen. It was a lot of like me after work, because I was a bartender server for like 9-10 years. And so I would work late shifts and I'd go there for a drink afterwards. And it would be me kind of by myself on one of these sort of upper landings on a bar stool, looking down by myself, having a beer up top. And
again, finding the spot to look at people.
Yes, truly finding a spot. And I think that's like, that idea is so huge for me of being a spectator, of kind of, and maybe that dips into a little bit of like voyeuristic aspects of sexuality, and maybe that's part of the kink itself. But yeah, I would always want to like find a spot to spectate and just sit in isolation, pretty much drinking my beer, spectating the situation. And they would always play music that I loved. So it was, even though it wasn't necessarily this place where like I found this gorgeous community of people who I would then have like lifelong friendships with, or to be recognized by, I still found a space where I could just exist in a way that felt so comforting in all aspects of myself, from the spectatorship, from the music, from the aesthetic, from the queer identity. I mean, even the popcorn. I love popcorn.
See, I was not going to bring this up, but was this a machine that you could just help yourself to popcorn?
Yeah, it's a little gross.
It's really gross.
But I know. It was always fully stocked with popcorn. You could just walk in, shovel in some popcorn in a bag, and enjoy a little snack in this little dive. Yeah.
This is a total segue, but do you think that buffet food is ever going to make a proper return post-COVID?
Not in the same way. No. The unregulated, absolute disgusting
Filth.
way that these filth. It is filthy. The way that these places operated. So in the same capacity, absolutely not. We lived in a lawless time before COVID when it comes to buffet style eateries. It was just there's no ladle. Fuck it. Use your hand.
Oh, God.
You want some soup? Dig in.
So I can't revive the Sizzler brand then? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, Sizzler, I mean, arguably Sizzler was out before the pandemic. Sizzler is trash. Sizzler is like
Oh, hang on, I've just looked it up. In September 2020, Sizzler USA filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy due to the COVID-19 pandemic hurting sales.
a must.
This,
Yeah.
okay, all right, no, okay.
I mean-
like, there is a hipster bar in this. Reimagining the buffet. How can I do this?
Well, okay. Are you familiar with those taps at tables bars?
Oh, yes, yeah.
I feel like that's a similar thing where it's a help yourself to drinks. And then they just charge you for the amount that you drank, or there's like a
So
prefix,
every table has a
whatever.
salad bar that we throw away once the people leave. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe it's like solo banquets. It's like little solo banquets.
Or maybe the food could fall from the ceiling in tubes.
Oh my God, feeding tubes, each seat. Individualized feeding tubes, and then you press a button on your little pad on the table, and it just shoots the food down into your mouth.
This is getting sexual again, isn't it?
I know. And you can control whenever it's like, oh, I don't want the whole meal, I just want a bite, and they'll send you like little snack pieces down the tube.
Oh.
I think we got it. I mean, I'm ready to invest.
The person in the kitchen is going to be run off their feet, but who cares?
You know, it's going to be a terrible job.
All right, cool. I'm down. I'll drop a business plan. I'll send it over.
Perfect,
Wait, so popcorn, we're moving on from popcorn. Oh, I wanted to just pick a little more at this thing about finding community and the expectation of finding community in a place and whether or not... I struggle with the concept of community, first of all, especially when it's around... I don't know why I do this show, like, which is all about community and bars and stuff. But anyway, like, that... I guess the myth of community, the romance of community, that we talk about community and we talk about the queer community, we talk about the gay community, but what is it? And how do you ever get to a point where you feel like you belong?
That is one of the best questions because I truly don't know if there's an answer. I agree that I think that the community as a whole and as an idea is generally a myth because as young people, especially as young queer people, there is the romanticization of like one day I'll find it, one day I'll be invited into it, and
yeah.
one day I'll be accepted into this community and I'll have found my people. I do think that there, at least for me, it came not from like communal events or communal spaces. Oftentimes it came from like hookup apps, at least in making more of these like lifelong friendships where they stem from like sexual experiences, but then ultimately become these platonic, respectful and loving, nurturing friendships. At least in my history with it. As far as like a communal space, the most difficult part for me is that most of these spaces are centered around alcohol. And I think that that's the hardest part is like there is that sort of revelry and sort of like inebriated bliss of like letting go of the week and sort of shedding your skin of capitalism by way of like working and it's Friday, it's Saturday, like fuck it, I'm going to just go off, and allowing yourself to do that in a space with others who are doing the same. So I think there's something to that, but on a personal note, those spaces have never felt, even when I was drinking, they have never felt like necessarily communal. They've always felt, how would I phrase this? They felt performative in sort of an inauthentic way. Not to say that performance is authentic, because I think inherently if you're performing, there's an inauthenticity to it, but like there is a level of inauthenticity to those spaces that has always sort of rubbed me the wrong way. Does that make sense?
Well, let's just pick at it a bit more.
Okay.
So, do you mean that, like, because there's a need or there's a culture of posturing?
Yes. Because a lot of these spaces, it's like you know, maybe you're cruising a little bit in this small way. You're looking for sex. You're looking for whatever. You're like flirting. You're making out. You're doing stuff. Like that's sort of the whole thing. And I think there is a. I enjoy the aspect of like to some degree of like peacocking, but to me, it's more of just a sexual fashion show than it is sort of a communal. I guess, but then what is community? Like a place for connection, a place for finding like-minded people and finding a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of unity.
But is it that?
Yeah, that's for me the disconnect. Or you mean the definition itself?
Yeah, like, is that just an idealized version of what community is?
I think so. At its most ideal, yeah. Like people would like to believe that. And again, that just ties into the romanticization of community that a lot of us have. And obviously it's different versions of it, but
there's an aspiration when you talk about community of belonging.
Yeah.
But is belonging a feeling or a fact? Oh God, I'm sorry. I don't know why. I don't know why.
No. I'm obsessed with this. Is breaking apart. You said is belonging a feeling or a fact?
Yeah, because like I belong to the gay community because I am gay. But do I belong to the gay community because I feel like I belong? Like, do I? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the trickiest part. I think by definition you are affiliated by existence, but simultaneously you could be constantly alone or constantly like rejected or constantly left out and still belong to the community on technicality alone. So yeah, that is a good question, right? Like what does it mean to be embraced by or to be accepted within a community that isn't just by way of existing as a queer person?
Because even if you're not like, you know, I was reading about Liberace the other day because it was like the anniversary of his birth recently. And he always denied the fact that he was gay. He always said he wasn't gay. So by that means, like, does he belong to the queer community even though he rejected the queer community? Or like, does he just have no choice and we're claiming him?
I think Liberace as a person...
Probably not the best. Probably not the best.
No. True, but I would argue that the idea of Liberace has sort of been claimed by the community at large. I think the personhood of Liberace, because of that sort of dismissal and sort of rebuking of said affiliation, I would say person, no, idea, yes. Because with celebrity or with... I mean, especially Liberace, there is sort of a larger than life idea that is attached to this person.
Yeah.
So the idea of Liberace is, I would say, an embracing of things queer, especially the way it's been used within culture as sort of a covert way, at least of the last like 40 years, to describe like effeminate men or femininity at large or queerness or gayness or what have you. It's sort of been like, the idea of Liberace has been reappropriated to have these conversations about queerness without having conversations about queerness in the popular culture.
Who appropriated it then? Are you talking about queer people or straight people in order to identify others like Liberace?
I'm going to say largely straight people because of their fear of like saying terms like gay or queer or what have you.
It'll lighten the loafers.
Yes, exactly. There's the equating of like a recognition of femininity in a sort of masculine presenting person. So then they can say, oh, that's kind of like, oh yeah, like a Liberace-esque is sort of like,
he's a total fag.
Yeah, exactly. Well, right.
But then I think we're going to end up going in circles.
I know, because I don't know if there's like a definitive way, because it is all perspective based and it's difficult. It's a more like heady conversation because it is so like intrinsic to one's experience, but that the overall idea, again, if you are this thing, there is already like you're already in the club. This is you. You identify. That's who you are. But then what does that mean on the outside? Because it can look like so many different things and still be called the same thing.
Okay. You're basically saying you've got no choice if you're deviating from heterosexuality or cisgenderism, then you're with us. But
Kind
even
of.
if that's not your experience or your reality.
I think so. Just in terms of like the rebuking of sort of cisgender heteronormativity in and of itself is an act of like queer rebellion. And I think it's beautiful, even if that performance itself, you exist in a world as something other than you're supposed to, based on the rules that have been set up in place by straight people and heteronormativity at large. So,
but what if all
the
of your
act
actions?
itself-
What if all of your actions are actively heteronormative?
what do you mean?
Well, like, what if you're what is a pray the gay away person? Like, what if you've gone through conversion therapy and you're like, I'm heterosexual now?
But then that would still be like performative heterosexuality, right?
Sure, but you know, if I meet you, I don't know that, so I can't
That's
like
true.
give you your laminated card.
I think it has to do with self-acknowledgement and a sort of a self-identifying.
But then what if
person,
you don't have the
'cause-
language? Sorry, I'm sorry.
No. It's true. It's 100% true. What if you don't have the language for it? Yeah. I mean, then how do you do that? Who? Yeah.
So basically, the lesson here is thinking is hard. Just don't bother, right?
Yeah. Don't bother. Just have sex.
Oh, good.
Honestly, it's way easier.
Good. Oh, that actually reminds me because I did write this down. I wanted to, like, about cruising. Did
Yeah.
you ever get to a point where you were addicted to the thrill of cruising, and so regular sex was just like, nah?
I would say yes, for a short period. To me, and this is so funny. It's funny to me, rather. The process of having sex seemed almost like too much work.
Well, yeah, douching, yeah.
Yeah, when it came to the fulfillment that I needed from the act, like the possibility of it and the cruising of it and like the whole experience of doing it was to me at that time just as exciting as having sex at times. So sometimes I would just cruise and be like, yeah, great. Like I'm not even coming or anything. I'm just, yeah, that was good. I'm into this. This is perfect. And I don't need to have sex.
But like, would you lead men on?
No, oftentimes, especially if it was a public situation, there was sort of a mutual understanding and a recognition that, like, if there is active disengagement, that's fine. At least for me.
Oh, of
'cause
course. I'm just, yeah, okay. I just was like, I was imagining he had like unzipped and started the act. And then you were
I
like,
would
okay,
never
bye.
get that far and then be like, oh, I'm actually good. Thanks. It would always be like the courting aspect of it before any action sort of took place, the longing glances, the sort of following, the signals, the like maybe crotch grabbing, the like all of that, like from afar, like to show like, hey, I'm excited, whatever. It was the courtship of it. What's what I'm talking about. It would never get to like that point. And then I'd be like, ooh, because at that point, if it's like, well, if it's there, then I'd be like, oh, well.
Oh, yeah, I'm not going to see an erect dick and not suck it. Like,
yes, I'm already here.
Yeah.
This is perfect. Cool. We made it. But if at any point it felt off or it felt a certain level of dangerous or it felt like instinctively bad, I would just disengage and leave and be like, well, that was still fun, you know?
Yeah. But,
Yeah.
and so did you ever do anything in Lucky 13?
I did. So this was one of those like really pivotal and huge, one of these pivotal moments for that sort of affirming of all of my longing for this space was one night I was there perched on my perfectly voyeuristic, what is the not
Stool?
awning. It's like a porch, but upstairs.
Oh, like a balcony. A
A
balcony.
balcony. Thank you. Oh, wow. I forgot that word. Perched on my perfect little indoor balcony with my beer. And this guy came in and he was like, he was so cute. And he immediately like looked at me and like smiled. And I was like, oh, here we go. And it was, I don't remember how long I had been going, but it wasn't that long. And he got a beer and he sat down beneath me and would like occasionally look up and would like smile and I would smile at him. And we did this little dance for about 10 minutes. He finished his beer and I finished mine and we ended up at the bar at the same time. And we both ordered another drink and then we ended up sitting together for a brief moment and we got to talking and it was very cool and nice. And he like downed the rest of his beer in like one big gulp and he's like, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I think you should follow me. And I said, yeah, I think I should too. And so I don't even think I finished my beer. I had a lot of it. And so I just like took another big swig and I followed him and we ended up just straight up having sex in the bathroom. And it was fantastic. It was so affirming. It was like, I mean, in hindsight, it seems cinematic because I think the way that I romanticize it as like this sort of personally and positively cataclysmic event in my life that just absolutely sparked this like everything that I wanted from this place and this space and the people and the idea of me and this spot. Like it was everything I wanted. And yeah, so it was like, to me, it was like in the stall, like bouncing between the walls, like making too much noise, just messy, sloppy kissing, like just like rough sex generally. And it was fucking perfect. It was truly perfect. It was exactly what I wanted and hoped from the idea of this space, even though it wasn't explicitly and overtly like, I mean, there's a rainbow flag outside, but it wasn't like this like very, very, very like obviously gay space, stereotypically gay space. Having sex in that bathroom was like, it was magical. And then we finished and I don't think we ever saw each other again. He left and I got another beer and I went back to my spot with a big smile on my face and it was exactly right. It was exactly correct.
Do you have any memories from Lucky 13 or clubbing from your own queer scene that you want to share? Well, if you do, please get in touch. I want to create the biggest online record of people's memories and stories of queer clubbing. Go to lostspacesPodcast.com and find the section Share a Lost Space. You can also reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My profile name across all three is Lost Spaces Pod. Find out more about Eric by following him on Instagram. His profile there is La Febre, ELAFEBRE. And Eric, if you're listening to this and I keep stuffing up the pronunciation of your surname, I'm really, really sorry. I'm trying. Also, make sure that you listen to the NotStalgia podcast wherever you find podcasts. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I have been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, which is called Well Groomed Boys and is playing underneath my talking right now on all good streaming platforms. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on your podcast platform, or just told people who you think might be interested in giving it a little listen too. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.